When the avoidant finally returns after a period of distance or after the relationship has ended, your response in that crucial moment determines whether you're protecting yourself or setting yourself up for another cycle of hope and disappointment. Most people respond to the avoidant's return with relief, gratitude that they came back, immediate willingness to give them another chance without requiring anything different from them. This response is understandable. You care about them. You've missed them. You want to believe their return means something has changed. But responding with immediate acceptance, with gratitude for breadcrumbs, with willingness to resume the relationship on the same terms that didn't work before is the fastest way to ensure you'll experience the same patterns that necessitated distance in the first place. The right way to respond when an avoidant comes back requires you to override your emotional impulse to welcome them immediately and instead respond strategically, protectively, with clarity about what reunion would actually require. It means treating their return not as the solution to your pain, but as the beginning of a process where they must demonstrate through sustained action that they've developed capacity for the consistency and presence that healthy partnership requires. The right response protects you from recommitting prematurely, ensures that if reunion happens, it's built on genuine change rather than temporary panic about loss, and demonstrates to the avoidant that your availability isn't guaranteed regardless of how they behave. That access to you requires them to show up differently than they did before. This response isn't about punishment or making them suffer. It's about self-respect, about requiring that words be backed by demonstrated change, about ensuring you don't abandon yourself again for someone whose patterns previously caused you real damage. Don't react immediately. Take time to assess their return. The first and most important step when the avoidant comes back is resisting the urge to respond immediately, to welcome them enthusiastically, to let them back into your life and heart without taking time to assess what their return actually means and whether conditions exist for genuine reunion. Your immediate emotional response is likely relief, hope, happiness that they've reached out. But this emotional response needs to be tempered with rational assessment, with protection of yourself, with recognition that their return could mean many things, from genuine transformation to temporary panic about losing you to simple loneliness that will fade once they feel secure again. Taking time before responding allows you to move beyond the initial emotional reaction into clearer thinking about what you actually need from them and whether their return suggests they can provide it. Taking time to assess means not responding immediately to their outreach, not being instantly available just because they've decided they're ready to reconnect. If they text, you don't text back within minutes with enthusiasm about hearing from them. If they call, you don't answer immediately, or you keep the conversation brief rather than diving into emotional reunion. If they suggest getting together, you don't clear your schedule to accommodate them as soon as possible. This lack of immediate response isn't about playing games or punishing them. It's about giving yourself space to think clearly, rather than reacting from the part of you that's been hoping for their return and wants to welcome it without question. The time you take to assess should involve getting clear with yourself about what their return would need to include for you to consider reunion. What would need to be different? What evidence of change would you need to see? What boundaries would need to be established? What work would they need to have done on their patterns? Getting clear on these requirements before you engage with them extensively ensures you're not making decisions from emotion alone, from relief or hope, that clouds your judgment about what you actually need to feel safe giving them another chance. The clarity you gain during this assessment period becomes the foundation for any conversations you have with them about whether reunion is possible. Taking time also allows you to observe their behavior during the period when they're trying to reconnect. Are they patient with your need for time to think, or do they pressure you for immediate response? Are they respectful of your boundaries about pacing, or do they try to rush you into reconnection before you're ready? Are they willing to give you space to assess, or do they become frustrated and withdraw again when you're not immediately available? Their behavior during this period reveals important information about whether they've actually changed. Someone who's done genuine work will understand your need for caution and will be patient with your process, while someone who's simply panicking about losing you will likely become impatient when you don't welcome them back immediately. The assessment period also allows you to check in with yourself about whether you even want them back. The time apart may have allowed you to build a life you're satisfied with, to recognize that you're better off without the stress their patterns created, to move beyond the point where their return is what you want. Taking time to assess includes honestly evaluating whether reunion serves you or whether it would be disrupting something good you've built in their absence. Just because they've come back doesn't mean you're obligated to receive them, and the time you take helps you distinguish between genuinely wanting them back versus feeling obligated to give them another chance because they're finally ready. Taking time before responding also communicates to the avoidant that your availability isn't guaranteed, that their return doesn't automatically restore their previous access to you, that they'll need to earn their way back, rather than simply deciding they're ready and expecting you to be waiting. This communication through your behavior, your lack of immediate enthusiasm, your need for time, your careful assessment, begins establishing a different dynamic than existed before, where you were always available and they controlled the relationship's pace through their withdrawal and return. Now, you're communicating that if reunion happens, it will be on terms that serve both people rather than only serving their comfort level. The time you take to assess should include consulting with people who know you well and care about your well-being. Friends, family, or therapist who saw you struggle with the avoidance patterns can provide perspective that's difficult to access when you're emotionally involved. They can remind you of what you experienced, can help you assess whether the avoidance return shows genuine signs of change, can support you in maintaining boundaries rather than immediately welcoming them back. This external perspective is valuable because it prevents you from minimizing how much their patterns hurt you, from convincing yourself that things weren't that bad, from accepting their return based on hope rather than evidence. Don't reacting immediately and taking time to assess creates the foundation for all your subsequent responses, because it ensures you're responding from a place of clarity and self-protection, rather than from relief and hope that cloud your judgment. The avoidant may interpret your lack of immediate response as coldness or as you playing games, but that interpretation reveals they're not yet understanding that their patterns created real damage, that your caution is justified, that reunion requires more than them simply deciding they're ready. The right response to their return begins with this pause, this space for assessment, this refusal to immediately give them what they want without ensuring that what they're offering is actually different from what drove you apart in the first place. Require clear communication about what's different now. The second crucial step when the avoidant comes back is requiring clear, explicit communication from them about what's different now, what's changed since the separation or distance, what makes them believe reunion would work when previous attempts didn't. This requirement isn't about being difficult or punishing. It's about ensuring that their return is based on genuine transformation rather than temporary discomfort with your absence, about getting specific information that allows you to assess whether conditions exist for healthier relationship, about making them articulate what they've learned and how they've grown, rather than accepting vague assurances that things will be different this time. Requiring clear communication means asking direct questions when they reach out about wanting to reconnect. What's different now? What have you learned during our time apart? What work have you done on the patterns that caused problems before? What makes you think things would be different if we tried again? These questions might feel confrontational, but they're necessary. They force the avoidant to move beyond vague expressions of missing you or wanting you back into specific articulation of what's changed. Their ability or inability to answer these questions clearly provides crucial information about whether they've actually examined their patterns or whether they're simply uncomfortable with your absence and hoping you'll take them back without requiring accountability. The clear communication you require should include the avoidant acknowledging specifically what went wrong previously and taking responsibility for their role in those problems. They need to articulate their patterns, the withdrawal, the inconsistency, the emotional unavailability, and own that these patterns caused real damage rather than minimizing or blaming you for being too sensitive or demanding. I recognized that I withdrew repeatedly when intimacy deepened, and that created insecurity for you. I understand that my inconsistency made you anxious and unable to relax in the relationship. I take responsibility for how my emotional unavailability left you feeling lonely despite being in partnership. This level of specific acknowledgement demonstrates that they've actually examined their behavior rather than having a vague sense that things didn't work without understanding why. Requiring clear communication also means asking what specific work they've done to address their patterns. Have they been in therapy? Have they read about attachment and applied what they learned? Have they developed strategies for managing their triggers for withdrawal? Have they practiced staying present during discomfort rather than automatically creating distance? The avoidant's ability to describe concrete work they've done. I've been in therapy for 6 months, working specifically on avoidant attachment. I've learned to recognize when I'm triggered toward withdrawal, and I've developed tools for staying present instead. I've practiced communicating about my need for space rather than just disappearing. Provides evidence that their return is based on genuine growth rather than just temporary loneliness. The clear communication you require should also include the avoidant articulating what they understand about what you need from partnership and whether they're capable of providing it. They need to demonstrate that they've listened to what you've expressed about your needs for consistency, for emotional availability, for integration into each other's lives, for progression toward deeper commitment. And they need to honestly assess whether they've developed capacity to meet those needs rather than promising to try, while remaining uncertain whether they actually can. I understand you need regular communication and presence. I've worked on my capacity for consistency, and I believe I can provide that now, though I know I'll need to demonstrate it through sustained behavior rather than just claiming it. Requiring clear communication also means being explicit about your own hesitations and concerns about reunion. You're not pretending everything is fine just because they've come back. You're being honest about the damage their previous patterns created, about your current caution, about what you'd need to see to rebuild trust. I'm hesitant because this isn't the first time we've tried to make this work. I need to see sustained change over months, not just immediate improvement that fades. I need you to understand that my trust was broken, and it will take time and consistent different behavior to rebuild it. This honesty ensures both people are entering potential reunion with realistic expectations rather than hoping that good intentions alone will be sufficient. The clear communication should include discussing specific expectations and boundaries for how reunion would work. You're not just picking up where things left off. You're starting something new that requires different structure. What does consistent communication look like specifically? How often will you see each other, and how will plans be made? What happens if old patterns resurface? What are the consequences if they withdraw again? Having these explicit conversations before fully recommitting ensures both people understand what reunion requires and what will happen if those requirements aren't met. Requiring clear communication also means listening, not just to what the avoidant says, but to how they say it. Are they defensive about their patterns or genuinely accountable? Are they specific about what they've learned or vague and general? Are they making promises about the future or describing work they've already done? Are they patient with your need for this communication? Or frustrated that you're not just accepting their return? The quality of their communication, their humility, their specificity, their accountability, their patience, tells you as much as the content of what they're saying. The clear communication you require creates foundation for potential reunion by ensuring both people understand what led to separation, what's changed, what reunion would require, and what happens if old patterns reassert. Without this communication, reunion is built on hope and assumption rather than on shared understanding and realistic assessment of whether genuine change has occurred. The avoidant may resist this level of communication, may prefer to just try again without extensive discussion of what went wrong, but that resistance itself is information. It suggests they haven't done the deep examination necessary for things to actually be different, that they're hoping reunion will work without having addressed the fundamental issues that made separation necessary. Establish boundaries before allowing them back in. The third essential step when the avoidant comes back is establishing clear boundaries before you allow them back into your life fully, making explicit what you need from the relationship and what consequences will follow if those needs aren't met. These boundaries aren't ultimatums designed to control the avoidant's behavior. They're protective structures that ensure you don't lose yourself again in accommodating their patterns, that define what's acceptable and what's not, that create clarity about what reunion requires from both people. Without these boundaries, you're likely to fall back into the same dynamic where you accommodate their limitations while suppressing your own needs, where their comfort takes precedence over your well-being, where the relationship exists on terms that serve them while leaving you chronically unsatisfied. Establishing boundaries begins with being clear about what you require for emotional safety in the relationship. This includes boundaries about communication frequency and consistency. I need contact at least every other day, even if it's brief. I need you to communicate when you need space rather than just disappearing. I need response to messages within a reasonable time frame, except in genuine emergencies. These communication boundaries ensure you're not left in anxiety-producing uncertainty about where you stand or when you'll hear from them next. The boundary should be specific and realistic, not demanding constant contact, but requiring enough consistency that you can relax rather than remaining in hypervigilance about their availability. The boundaries also need to address what happens when the avoidant feels the urge to withdraw. When you're feeling overwhelmed or need space, you need to communicate that to me rather than just creating distance. You can say, I'm feeling triggered toward withdrawal and need some processing time, rather than becoming unavailable without explanation. We can negotiate what space looks like, rather than you unilaterally deciding to disappear. This boundary acknowledges the avoidant's legitimate need for space, while requiring that their space-taking be communicated rather than imposed without consideration for your experience. It creates structure for their withdrawal that makes it manageable rather than destabilizing. Establishing boundaries includes being clear about expectations for follow-through on commitments. If you commit to plans, I need you to honor those commitments except in genuine emergencies. If something comes up and you need to change plans, I need advance notice and rescheduling rather than last-minute cancellation. Repeatedly canceling or being unreliable will result in me no longer making plans with you. This boundary addresses the avoidance tendency toward inconsistency by making clear that reliability matters and that repeated unreliability has consequences. It's not demanding perfection, but it is requiring basic respect for your time and basic follow-through on agreements made. The boundaries also need to address emotional availability and presence. I need you to be emotionally present during conversations, not just physically present while emotionally checked out. I need you to engage with difficult topics rather than shutting down or changing the subject. I need some reciprocity and vulnerability. I'm not expecting you to match my level of emotional sharing immediately, but I need to see you working toward greater emotional availability over time. This boundary acknowledges the avoidance difficulty with emotional presence, while making clear that some level of emotional engagement is required for partnership. That physical presence without emotional availability isn't sufficient. Establishing boundaries includes being explicit about what relationship progression you need and within what time frame. I need to see this relationship moving forward. I'm not expecting immediate commitment, but I need to see progression, meeting each other's friends and family, discussing future plans, moving toward greater integration of our lives. If after 6 months we're still in the same ambiguous place, without progression, I'll need to reconsider whether this relationship can meet my needs for partnership. This boundary addresses the avoidance tendency to keep relationships in perpetual holding pattern by making clear that indefinite ambiguity isn't acceptable, that you need forward movement even if that movement is gradual. The boundaries also need to address what happens if old patterns resurface. If you withdraw without communication, if you become consistently unavailable, if you revert to the patterns that didn't work before, I won't accept it silently hoping you'll change. I'll address it once clearly, and if it continues, I'll create distance to protect myself. I'm not willing to go through multiple cycles of you reverting to old behavior and me accommodating it. This boundary makes clear that there are consequences for returning to dysfunction, that you won't tolerate repeated cycles of improvement and regression, that the avoidant needs to sustain change rather than just making temporary efforts that fade once they feel secure. Establishing boundaries includes making clear what you need for yourself, independent of the relationship. I'm maintaining my friendships, my hobbies, my independent life. I'm not reorganizing my life around your availability like I did before. I need you to respect that I have commitments that don't include you, and I'm not available at your convenience whenever you decide you're ready to connect. This boundary protects your independence and ensures you don't fall back into the pattern of organizing your life around the avoidance unpredictable availability. The boundaries also need to include what you'll do if you feel yourself falling back into old patterns of accommodation and self-abandonment. If I notice I'm suppressing my needs to avoid triggering your withdrawal, if I find myself accepting treatment that doesn't meet my standards, if I recognize I'm losing myself in accommodating you, I'm going to create space to reassess whether this relationship is healthy for me. I'm committed to protecting myself even if that means disappointing you. This boundary ensures you're monitoring your own patterns as much as the avoidance, that you're taking responsibility for not abandoning yourself, even if they're showing up better than before. Establishing these boundaries before allowing the avoidant back in creates structure that protects you, while also giving the avoidant clear expectations about what reunion requires. The boundaries shouldn't be delivered as threats or ultimatums, but as clear information about what you need to feel safe and valued in relationship. The avoidance response to these boundaries is itself revealing. If they become defensive, if they suggest your boundaries are too demanding, if they resist the structure you're establishing, it indicates they're not ready for the level of partnership you need. But if they receive the boundaries with understanding, if they appreciate that you're being clear about requirements rather than expecting them to guess, if they commit to respecting the boundaries you've established, it suggests they've developed enough maturity and motivation to potentially make reunion work on healthier terms than existed before. Watch their actions over time, not just their words. The fourth crucial step when the avoidant comes back is watching their actions over an extended period, rather than accepting their words as evidence of change, requiring that they demonstrate through sustained behavior that they've actually developed new capacity, rather than just making promises about being different. Words are easy. The avoidant can articulate understanding of their patterns, can express commitment to change, can promise to show up differently this time. But words without corresponding action are meaningless, and accepting promises as though they're equivalent to demonstrated change sets you up for disappointment when the avoidant's behavior doesn't match their stated intentions. The right response to their return includes giving them opportunity to prove their change through sustained action while protecting yourself from recommitting fully before that proof exists. Watching actions over time means establishing a period, typically several months at minimum, during which you're observing their behavior while maintaining emotional protection and limited investment. You're not immediately returning to full intimacy and commitment. You're cautiously allowing them back into your life while paying attention to whether their behavior matches what they've said about having changed. During this period, you're looking for consistency, for follow-through, for demonstrated capacity to show up differently than they did before. You're assessing whether improvements are sustained or whether they fade once the avoidant feels secure that they've regained your availability. The actions you're watching include whether they maintain consistent communication without reverting to periods of unexplained distance. Are they texting or calling regularly, as they said they would? When you reach out, are they responsive? If they need space, are they communicating about it, rather than just disappearing? The consistency of their communication over weeks and months is more revealing than any single conversation about their commitment to being more present. You're looking for patterns of behavior rather than isolated instances of improvement. Watching actions also means observing whether they follow through on commitments they make. Do they show up for plans or do they cancel? Do they arrive on time or are they chronically late? When they say they'll do something, do they do it? The avoidant's ability to honor commitments consistently reveals whether they've developed the capacity for reliability or whether they're still operating from the same patterns of inconsistency that characterized the relationship before. A few instances of reliability aren't sufficient. You're looking for sustained follow-through over time that demonstrates reliability has become their baseline rather than their exception. The actions you're watching include how they respond when difficulties arise or when old patterns get triggered. Do they withdraw when intimacy deepens, or do they stay present? Do they shut down during difficult conversations, or do they engage even when uncomfortable? When they feel the urge to create distance, do they communicate about it and work through it, or do they just act on it? The avoidance behavior during challenging moments, when their attachment system is activated, when vulnerability is required, when conflict needs to be navigated, reveals more about genuine change than their behavior during easy, comfortable times. Watching actions also means observing whether they're integrating you into their life in ways they didn't before. Are they introducing you to friends and family? Are they including you in their plans and activities? Are they making space in their life for the relationship? Or are they still keeping you compartmentalized? The avoidant's willingness to integrate you into their broader life demonstrates that they're actually committing to partnership, rather than maintaining the relationship as something separate from their real life that can be easily disconnected if they become uncomfortable. The actions you're watching include whether they're actually doing the work they said they were doing. If they said they're in therapy, are they actually going consistently? If they mentioned reading about attachment, are they applying what they've learned? If they describe strategies for managing their triggers, are they using those strategies? You're not demanding proof of their therapy sessions or reading their books, but you should see evidence in their behavior that they're doing work on themselves, greater self-awareness, ability to name their patterns when they're happening, skills for staying present that they're actively employing. Watching actions over time also means observing whether the quality of the relationship is actually better than it was before, or whether you're experiencing the same patterns despite their promises of change. Are you less anxious than you were before? Do you feel more secure in the relationship? Are your needs being met more consistently? Is the relationship enhancing your life or creating the same stress and confusion it created previously? Your own experience of the relationship, how you feel in it, how it impacts your life, is data about whether things are genuinely different, regardless of what the avoidant says about having changed. The observation period also requires you to notice if improvements are sustained or if they fade over time. Many avoidants make significant efforts immediately after a reunion when they're motivated by fear of losing you again. But these efforts fade once they feel secure that you're committed and not going anywhere. You're watching to see if the behavior changes are maintained over months as the avoidant becomes more comfortable, or if they gradually revert to old patterns once the immediate threat of loss has passed. Sustained change over time, 6 months, a year, is much more reliable evidence of genuine transformation than temporary improvement that lasts only weeks. Watching actions rather than accepting words also means being willing to end the relationship or create distance again if the actions don't match the promises. If the avoidant said they'd changed, but their behavior over time reveals they haven't. If they revert to old patterns after initial improvement, if they're not demonstrating the capacity they claim to have developed, you need to be willing to acknowledge that reality and make decisions accordingly. This willingness to walk away, if actions don't match words, is what ensures you're not trapped by hope and promises while experiencing the same dysfunction that necessitated separation originally. The focus on actions over time, rather than words, creates accountability that ensures reunion is based on demonstrated change rather than on hoped-for transformation that hasn't actually occurred. It protects you from recommitting fully based on the avoidant's good intentions or articulated understanding without requiring them to prove through sustained behavior that they're actually capable of showing up differently. And it gives the avoidant clear feedback about whether their efforts are sufficient. If they're genuinely changing, sustained action will prove it. If they're not, continued observation will reveal that reality before you've invested fully in a relationship that hasn't actually transformed, despite the avoidant's belief or claim that it has.